Today we're going to talk about the effect of mountains and oceans on a climate. First thing we have to remember is that warm air can hold more water than cold air can. And we already kind of know this. If you think about the summertime is when we worry about it being humid. We don't worry about it being cold, being humid in the wintertime when it's cold. Cold air simply can't hold as much water as warm air can. So here we have a mountain, incredibly drawn mountain. And so we have air moving in. Maybe this air is coming off of the ocean out here. So there's water out here. And so the air has lots of water in it. Now, the air is relatively warm coming off of the ocean. But as the air starts to rise, think about what happens when you go up a mountain. What do we usually see on the top of mountains? We see that there's snow capped. So as the air starts to rise, it gets colder up here. Colder air cannot hold as much water as warm air can. So when this air gets up here, it can't hold the water that it could hold down here. Just imagine filling a cup full of water and then trying to pour it into a smaller cup, and it wouldn't all fit. So what happens is it starts to form clouds, and then eventually these clouds are going to rain. So this side of the mountain, as the air is rising, and it can't hold as much water, gets a lot of rain. Right? We call this the windward side of the mountain. The windward side of the mountain is the side that the moist air hits coming from the ocean. Now, once this air gets up and it goes over the top of the mountain, it starts to come back down and it warms back up. Now, when it gets down here, it no longer has any water. It's put most of its water out over here. So over here, the air is very dry. So on this side, we usually find things like rainforests and really lush valleys and greenery. Over here, we're going to find it's very dry, and this is where we usually see deserts. Right? A great example of this would be in California. So here's a map of California. We have the Sierra Nevada mountains that run through California. If you look at the windward side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, right, they're very green, right? We see lots of rain here. There's so much rain here that things like grapes grow really well, which is what makes this a very famous region for growing grapes for wine. On the opposite side, the leeward, right, we call this the leeward side of the mountain. On the leeward side of the mountain, we start to find all the deserts that make up Nevada. So these are deserts, the windward and leeward side of the mountain. Oceans also have a significant effect on the climate of a region. First thing we have to remember is what specific heat. Specific heat is the amount of energy needed to heat up an object. And we should remember that water heats up slower and it cools down slower. So it heats and cools slower. The land heats and cools faster. Right, so it's going to heat up faster and it's going to cool down faster. So how does this affect our climate? Well, let's compare the climates of, say, Galveston and El Paso. In terms of latitude, there's really not a significant difference. There's a slight difference, but not nearly as big of a difference as is indicated by their differences in climates. So during the summer, let's say the ocean here, the Gulf of Mexico, maybe gets to say 80, 85 degrees. So the wind coming in off of the Gulf of Mexico hitting Galveston is 80 degrees. So maybe the land here, the climate down here in Galveston in the summer is 85, 90 degrees. We know that it's usually not nearly as hot. It could be humid, but maybe 90 degrees. Now here, maybe the land heats up to 120 degrees, right? Because land heats up faster. So the wind coming and hitting Galveston or hitting El Paso is quite hot. So it might get to be, say, 110, 120 degrees in El Paso. Now let's go to the winter time. Maybe the water down here in Galveston drops to, say, 70, 65 degrees in the winter. So during the winter time, Galveston's temperatures may drop down into the 60s and 70s. So let's say it's 70 degrees here in Galveston. Now this land out here cools up quickly, 120 degrees. It also heats up quickly. It cools down quickly as well. So maybe the land out here gets down to 20 degrees in El Paso, and so they have much colder winters than we do here. So if you notice, we range in this 90, or Galveston might range in the 90 to 70 range, where El Paso has a much larger range. It's going 120, maybe down into the 40s at night for a lot of the winter. So when you are by the coast, you have a much more mild climate. Okay, so the thing to remember, if you live by the ocean, you have a mild climate. You have a more extreme climate if you do not live by the water. Right? Think about San Diego. San Diego is right by the water. It's perfect temperatures. Everybody wants to live there.